All right, thanks everyone for joining. I hope you all just enjoyed that session upstairs. A lot of new interesting things coming out. Really appreciate everyone in the back that's just sitting on the floor, and for you guys up here. That's awesome. Thanks for attending this and standing up on the walls. This is a lot of great things to see with this many people in the room, and I'm assuming this is why this group of people right here has gone through and started to implement with Salesforce DX, and you're going to get to hear a lot about what they've done and then ask them questions as well as myself. So that being said, at the end, we don't have a roadmap session, but chances are you're going to ask some forward-looking things, so I'd like to answer those questions. So I'm going to show you our safe harbor statement. So if I mention something that's going into beta or pilot or that, just make sure you understand that you can't make buying decisions on those things. So this entire session is about how our customers are building apps with Salesforce DX. You're going to hear a lot about how they're doing things, and they work in different verticals and different industries, so they all have their own way of thinking about addressing it and how they're doing things with our tooling. So to introduce myself, my name is John Vogt. I'm a product manager on Salesforce DX. I've worked at Salesforce for about 7 years now in the area of ALM, working on environments, our metadata APIs, and release management. And next to me is Karen Fidelic. You may have seen her about 5 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, presenting on DX. So, yeah, I'm freezing, which is why I have this jacket on. So we're going to sort of MC this and help answer the general questions outside of the specific things that these folks are doing. So I'm going to try to get to that stuff really quick. As an introduction of what Salesforce DX is, and we've shown this slide a lot in our presentations, but these are the 4 principles that we use when we're designing our tools and features around ALM and development experience. So we always are looking into team collaboration. And team collaboration when it comes to Salesforce DX is really about integrating with version control tools. Open and prescriptive. If you saw the last session, there was a lot about what we're doing with CLI extensibility, extensions into VS Code. So we are doing quite a bit with our program to make sure that when we're building tools, these are tools that you can adopt when you need them. You can integrate with the tools that you already have. Automated delivery. This is probably the #1 focus for us. It's our guiding light. We want to make sure that development on the platform can be completely automated. Karen talked a little bit about a program that we call internally Metadata 1 in the previous session, where we're talking about needing to close gaps and talk about metadata and automation of metadata into different channels. So that's going to support this idea of automated delivery. And then built for enterprise. There's all sorts of businesses that work on Salesforce, and the complexity of these businesses vary wildly, actually, from the sort of their entry level to our tooling, which happens to be around Professional Edition, all the way through to Unlimited Edition, or if you're an ISV, or maybe you're a partner that's building around. There's lots of different ways that you can extend and work and customize around Salesforce. So our tooling is built for enterprise, meaning built for all of these enterprises. We're trying to cover all of these complexities. This is general workflow that looks like for Salesforce DX. One thing that we pointed out here in previous iterations of this slide was very much just the Salesforce DX new lifecycle, which was based around developing in Scratch orgs, and then when you get over into release management, you're building packages. One thing to just point out here, and this is something that's going to be reflected in a lot of our content and documentation and assessment enablement materials over this year, is we're going to give you more information and more material on how to assess not just when to use packaging, but also when to use change sets, when it's better to use a Scratch org for development or a sandbox for development in your process. So we're going to be providing a lot more materials on that, and I think the information that they're going to provide today is also going to help you in that assessment and understanding how to get involved.
So with that, I want to introduce our guests here, and this is really who you came to hear from. And so I want to introduce from Solera, we've got Anthony Sanchez and James Prevelet. Scott Von Schilling is here from CRM Science. And we've got Andrew Davis and Saurabh Deep from Appirio. And so I'm just going to hand it right over, and we're going to get into their experiences that they've had with DX. Okay, so Scott.
Yep. Great, thank you. I'm Scott Von Schilling. I am a technical lead for CRM Science. CRM Science is a collection of Salesforce developers, totally based in the USA, primarily in the Philadelphia region. So today I'd like to talk about one specific example of where we used DX, and that would be for the AI Lab app. So last summer, CRM Science participated in the Salesforce Incubator, which is now called the Accelerator, and our job there was to be the subject experts to assist startups with getting on board with the Einstein API. So we had a team in San Francisco working at the incubator, and they found that they had a strong need for a easy-to-use UI to help these startups get on board with the API, because it was all code-based. So if they just had like a point-and-click tool, it would help them a lot better with being able to import their data over to the API. And so they enlisted the help of a team in Philadelphia to go build this app for them. So we use this internal work as an opportunity to experiment and participate with the public beta of DX. We got, and this became our first major application using it. So we got a team of about 5 developers working for really the entire summer on this app. We would build it, they would demo it to the teams at the incubator and also to the Einstein teams directly at Salesforce. And we'd get feedback, and then we'd have multiple iterations. So by the end of the summer, we finished the app. We were quite satisfied with it. We still keep it internal, but we do offer it to our clients as a service right now. Next slide, please. So the actual process in which we develop this app using the DX tool is as follows. And of course, you start off with the developer being onboarded with the project, and the first step that they do is they clone the repository from our Git repo. Now, this alone is a big change from what we're used to doing, because typically when you onboard a developer, you have to set up a developer org for them, or maybe you have to set up a username or password on a sandbox for them. But all of our developers, they have access to our Bitbucket repo. They can just get the repository, clone it, create their own Scratch org, and they're ready to go. So that alone was a very evident change that we discovered just from the get-go. So they have the Scratch orgs. They develop the features on the Scratch orgs. When they're ready to commit it, they commit it to the Bitbucket repo and push it up. And at that point, our CI process takes over. Once they commit to the repo, a CI process actually takes that code, launches its own Scratch org, and it runs all of the tests on that org. And it gives it either the go-ahead or it gives error messages to the developer. So if the CI says that the code is good, then you can see that it loops back to other developers, taking that code, pulling it to their Scratch orgs, and being able to work off of it. But if it gets to a point where we want to actually release a demo, then the tech lead, which is me, merges that feature branch to the master branch. And when that happens, we actually have another CI process that kicks off that takes the code, pushes it to a packaging org, and then runs a DX command to actually upload that package and essentially release a beta. Now, I believe this is also a new feature with DX that originally, if you ever wanted to release a package, a managed package, you would actually have to go to the packaging org, manually click the button to upload it, and then wait to get your link to your install link. But with this way, nobody ever had to log into a packaging org. The CI process took care of it for us, and the CI process gave us an install link via email. So once we get an install link, then that goes over to the team in San Francisco at the incubator. They install that package on a demo server. They run their own usability tests. They give us feedback, and we iterate on that. Or they demo it to the clients. The clients give us the feedback, and we iterate on that. So this was the process that we developed using Salesforce DX now with a new CI component built into it, and just easy onboarding for new developers. So what are the key takeaways that we got from this experiment? Well, the key takeaway is that managed packages are very easy to translate over to Salesforce DX. That's because Salesforce DX is a very package-based system. So if you already have a package available, you're able to just use it with very little translation. We do have an App Exchange team at CRM Science, and this is the team that does our external work for our clients. They had already set up a CI process using the AMP migration tool and Git to work in multiple developer sandboxes and synchronize and push things over to a packaging org. So we found that really the Salesforce DX CLI offered pretty much all the functionality that we were getting from the AMP migration tool. So we were able to easily replace that in our existing scripts. And also, we were able to easily replace those developer orgs with Scratch orgs. And again, Scratch orgs are a lot easier to spin up and maintain than developer orgs. So that was a real bonus there. So because it was so easy to translate our managed packages to DX, the App Exchange team actually went through the process of converting all of our ongoing App Exchange products to DX, and we finished that at the beginning of the year. But another thing we also found was that developers really enjoyed using DX. I have a quote here from one of our advanced developers, Mike, who actually went to our boss during his quarterly review, and when the boss asked him, well, what do you want to do next for this company? He said, I want to do more DX projects. I really enjoyed using it. So there's a quote there from Mike directly. But also on top of that, the person who runs our App Exchange team, Matt, also really enjoyed the process that he went through with converting the existing projects over, saying that every time he dives into it, he starts liking it more and more. So we've actually been very satisfied with DX at CRM Science, and I'm looking forward to being able to convert now all of our projects over to the new tools.
Thanks, Scott. We're going to go right down the row here, and then we'll do questions at the end. So we're going to hand it off to Solera.
Sure, thanks. I'm James Prevalet from Solera Health. Solera Health is an integrated benefits network. We have basically a three-sided marketplace. So we're using everything that Salesforce has to offer, basically. If they have a tool that you can bolt on, glue on, or attach to the side, we probably have one of them. Because we're in a three-sided marketplace, we have insurance companies that we work with, we have healthcare providers that we work with, and we have the general public, the consumers that have to sign up for the benefits. Well, as a result of that, we needed to have a rapid-fire software development team that could develop code rapidly in a highly object-oriented form, and we tore a page from Atlassian. So if you're a software engineer, you probably you recognize that they're a very highly admired company in the software world, as well as Salesforce, of course. But the page we took from them was shift left. And shift left means that rather than have a QA department, we push all the QA to the left side of the Scrum board. And in order to do that, we had to build everything out in objects that met the solid principles. So we do code reviews and design reviews to make sure that all of our objects meet the solid principles. And as a result of that, we needed to highly automate the testing of all the code so that we didn't get to the end of a release at the end of the sprint, and then, gee, we're in QA, whoops, that's going to slip to the next sprint, right? We had to have a very rapid cadence in order to meet this high market demand. With that, then, we went to look at what Salesforce had to offer, and Anthony then quickly set up a proof of concept with Salesforce DX, and it's been working great for us. So I'll have Anthony explain the details.
Yeah, so as James mentioned, we have, we're actually more a traditional customer of Salesforce. We're not an ISV or App Exchange developer, so all of our code is in one huge sort of, someone called it a happy suit, I think that was you. And so one of the challenges we had in the beginning was breaking all those things out into more modular packages, because our business necessitated that we do that so that we can move fast. We've gone to the point where approximately 60% of that code base that we had is been converted into a lot of DX projects, and they're very small, very modular. This is sort of the application lifecycle management or environment management strategy that we use. So what we have is when a developer wants to start working on any one of these DX projects, he'll check out the repository that contains that project. He'll create a feature branch. For some of our projects, we use something called Git flow, and for some, we just use a more basic Git workflow. But either one of those require a feature branch. They'll work on that feature branch in a Scratch org. And Scratch orgs have really helped us sort of adopt this shift left strategy that James mentioned, because they're isolated environments so we can have targeted testing against the feature, not have to worry about a lot of other stuff. Once developers kind of gone through those steps, done as much of the testing they can in an isolated environment, what they'll do is they'll push it up to the repository again. We have a bunch of CI jobs we set up for every project. Those will go do a very similar thing to what Scott had mentioned, which is spin up a DI Scratch org, run the unit tests, run the automated tests we have related to that project. And if it's good, then as part of that pull request process, that's where it occurs. We'll go ahead and bring it in. And what we've started experimenting with, the unlock packaging feature in Salesforce, is we don't really have a kind of, what we used to do before we had DX, to give some perspective, was every branch that we had, let's say in workflow, you had or Git flow, you had a develop branch, a release branch, and a master branch, right? Those would kind of be very tightly correlated to each one of these environments, right? This QA, this UAT, and this prod org. With unlock packaging and with DX, we don't really have to be that stringent. We can say, well, maybe we have an alpha build. Well, that will go to QA because we want to do some more extensive testing on it. Maybe it's a hotfix. Well, we don't need to go through all the environments. We'll go straight to production orgs. One of the other things that we have to contend with is we have multiple orgs, or multiple production orgs, production instances. So having that packaging, having DX really helps us facilitate that. I honestly don't know how we would do it without DX. So in the next slide, all that stuff's not for free. There's a lot of work that goes into kind of transitioning it, but these are sort of the key three things that if I had to do it again, I would take this approach. And that's start small with independent apps. There's only so much you can do, because if you're a more traditional Salesforce organization, you might have a lot of custom objects, custom fields that are used everywhere in all these different applications. But identifying the pieces that are more independent, let's say it's just one custom object that's used for a particular function in your org, then just put that in a project itself. We started with a managed package. As Scott mentioned, those kind of lend themselves very easily, depending on how big it is. Ours is pretty small, so that helped us to get started with it. The second thing is, as you get experience with transitioning all these small applications, you need to come up with a strategy about how you're going to convert and manage some of the dependencies, we'll say, in your org, mostly related, again, around to the schema in your organization. The approach that we took was we have a project that's just the schema that's shared in a lot of different places. Things like opportunity custom fields and lead custom fields, those are used everywhere. So we have one DX project that just tracks that schema. And then the third thing is, which DX really lends itself to, is to automate everything. Our team is pretty small. We have about 5 or 6 Salesforce developers. And we're not just doing Salesforce development, we're doing a lot of other stuff. So having a lot of automation that you might have in some other more traditional development platforms really helps you to get a lot of velocity and to also take the human equation out of the development process, be able to reproduce stuff very easily. So that's been our experience with it.
Great. Thank you, Anthony and James.
Cool. So
We're going to, lead right in.
fun. So my name is Andrew Davis. I'm at Appirio. So Appirio is one of the oldest and largest Salesforce consulting partners. So we obviously consult across a lot of different customers of different sizes. So we've been doing continuous integration for years and years on some of those customer projects. But I lead an internal initiative called Appirio DX. And Appirio DX is our effort to make continuous integration available to all of our projects, small, medium, large projects, and also to make it easy for customers to set up CI for their own systems. So Saurabh and I will be introducing about our project.
Hey everyone, I'm Saurabh Deep. I'm the architect on Appirio DX project that Andrew mentioned. So what we are doing with Appirio DX is that we are looking to enable all our projects that we do internally in Appirio on using DevOps. So we execute hundreds of new projects every year at Appirio, and most of those projects have opportunities for automation in areas such as testing, releases, etc. So Appirio DX is our initiative to make turnkey continuous integration, continuous delivery available to all our projects. So it is a wider initiative, not applicable just to Salesforce projects, but to others as well. But Salesforce DX is a big part of that because most of our projects are Salesforce projects. Now, it has been built on open source technologies. We have used things like Docker, Node.js, and our intent is to make our Appirio DX project, that Appirio DX tool set, also available as open source tool so that a lot of the community people can also make use of that. Again, since as I said, it is all based around Salesforce DX. So Salesforce DX's JSON formatted output is the key here for us because we have been making a lot of programmatic calls to Salesforce DX from within our own custom code, our Node.js code, and Salesforce DX JSON format output has been just a godsend for us. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide. So what you see on the screen right now is a very simplified version of the Appirio DX architecture. And there are two sections here. The topmost that you see is the simplest possible get branching strategy that you may ever have. So there is a single master branch, and out of which a developer can create his own feature branches. And when done with it, just merge that back into the master branch. Now, the bottom section is where all the magic is. The initial part is the development part, which Visual Studio Code editor or any other code editor of your choice the developer uses. Here, the Salesforce DX Scratch-Off comes into picture, where as a developer, do not need to know a lot about Salesforce metadata. You do not need to be an expert on that. You just need to know what you are going to develop. Spin up a Scratch-Off, do a code push, do a code pull, and as soon as you are done with your feature development, just commit your code to your feature branch. As soon as you commit your code to your feature branch, the CI process kicks in. So CI process, this may include a number of things: your automated testing, your quality scanning, your security scanning. whatever is supposed to be used in that particular project or in your whole process as a whole. Again, we make use of Salesforce scratch orgs at this point of time to spin up review apps. So these review apps are used by QA people for the QA purposes. They are used by the leads for code review and all such things. So the second portion, which I just described, the internal review and testing portion, is followed by the destiny of all the development, that is the release. So Andrew, would you like to take this forward?
Sure, yeah. So as Saurabh mentioned, Salesforce DX has made possible a whole lot of simplifications of the CI process in Salesforce. So it used to be, like on the left, every developer would have to become an expert in Salesforce metadata, whether you liked it or not. If you wanted to participate in CI, CD, you have to become an expert. So Salesforce DX has simplified that. You can just do source push, source pull. It's also removed the issue of having to wait for something to be deployed over to a QA org or deployed to another org for somebody to see it live, because you can create a review app in this review process, the second section. But the third thing that it's simplified is or the final release. So as Anthony had described, for our larger projects, we would always create one branch that represents the production version of your code base, one branch that represents the UAT version of your code base, and merge things in there. But essentially, you're tracking many different versions of the same code base. But with the packaging too, which we've started to work with, it simplifies that in the sense that you don't have to keep track of what version of that code is in UAT, what version's in production. You just create a package. You just create a package, and you can you create it from your code repo, and then you can automatically install it in one of your orgs, and you can enable a manual CI process to install it in other orgs. So you can have a triggered CI process say, hey, install this version of this package in my production org. And what that means, you're not having to track all of these different branches, which greatly reduces the complexity of your Git repo. And greatly reduces the risk of merge conflicts and all of the other difficulties that arise. So one of the other main simplifications that this has led to is that you don't have to just have one code repo. Like, I've been a big believer philosophically in having one code repo where everything, all your branches are reflected, so you can have a single view of all of your stuff. But with artifact-based development, as Salesforce has been calling it in the Trailhead modules, it is okay to have multiple different repos, like one repo per package or one repo per group of related packages. So we then tend to have a repo that is a group of stuff that one team is going to work on. And what that means is that it can be relatively simpler, easier to understand, and all of these things are reducing the cognitive complexity for your developers, reducing the risk of weird problems, hard to diagnose and debug issues. I'm going to go to the next slide. To summarize some of the lessons learned that we've had using Salesforce DX, if your teams don't already have experience doing DevOps, you'll need to start slowly, and you'll need to start with things like training. Obviously, people need to take a bit of time to get to know Git. There's a ton of really good tutorials there, or the version control system of your choice. You'll need to know the basics of CI and so forth. So take incremental steps. Every one of us up here has sort of reiterated the start small, start incrementally with one package or one module approach. As I said, it's okay to have multiple repos. I used to want to have everything in one repo so I could do a global find and replace. So I always know, because your metadata is everywhere, it's scattered everywhere. But if it's all in packages, you no longer have trouble finding, what is something tied to, what is a bit of your metadata tied to, because you see what package it comes from. So dive into packaging. So packaging to the unlocked packages, I think that's their new name. Unlocked packages are available already now. You can start experimenting with them. You can increase from that 2,400 number that Wade showed earlier in the day. You'll need to invest some time learning a build tool, or if you want to do automation. Solera's using Ant still as their build tool, but with the core of Salesforce DX modules, we're using a build tool called Gulp, which works very well reading and writing JSON formatted results from the Salesforce DX commands. And again, that JSON formatted output, as Salesforce mentioned, is your friend. So we also created internally, as Saurabh said, we're planning on open sourcing what we're creating. One of our main developers, Brian Leboff, he created a package on Node NPM called SFDX Node, which makes it easier to call those Salesforce DX commands programmatically. So we're looking forward to using these core libraries that were announced today, but we had to do something. So we built this SFDX Node package a while back. Over to you guys.
Great. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit, but first say thanks to you all. It's really encouraging and exciting to hear the success stories that you've had and to share it with the community here. So a couple of themes that I think we've been hearing. Automation. So you're going to be hearing that a lot. Automate all the things was on somebody's slide. Salesforce DX, as John said, has been really a key mantra of it is all around automation. And so take advantage of it. We're building it to support that. And you've heard about how these guys are using it as well. Start small. So we heard a couple examples, one where we started with managed packages, one where we started with the happy soup. That is a real term, actually, in fact. But regardless of kind of what you're starting with, figure out a way to break it up and start small and kind of build from that. And finally, Andrew was just mentioning how experience with pro devs helped, with professional development helps. And this is very true. We definitely started Salesforce DX focusing on the pro developer, given that we had kind of a gap in that experience for pro developers. But I also want to point out that our vision is to reach out to all types of developers here. So we just want to make that clear. That we want to be able to satisfy all types of developers, either click-based, code-based, anywhere in between. And you'll probably be hearing more about that throughout this whole week. That is the vision of where we're going. Anything else you want to add, John, before we open it up for questions? Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. Is it on?
I don't know. 1, 2.
Yep.
Okay, so does this build process work if you have packages that have dependencies? So a package that's built on top of another package, can you build a scratch work off of that and test one of them?
So I know that that's on the near-term roadmap for Salesforce to support dependent packages. We've had to build a shim, if you want to call it, where it looks at where it actually reads in the Salesforce DX project config file, sees what are the dependencies, and then installs those in order. So that's one of the things we've done internally.
Yeah, package dependency is built into packaging too. So we do have a process in place that you define what the dependent package is, not only in the definition of the child package, but then you're also going to have to write it into your tools to also install that dependent package in the scratch org prior to pushing the child package out.
Yeah, just to make sure we're clear on it, in the current form of the beta program for unlocked packages, you have the ability to explicitly define in your configuration in your project what packages you depend on. We do not yet have a package resolution manager on installation. So as they were saying, when you go to do install, you've got to script that up yourselves.
It'd be really nice to have that, though.
Yes. Yes, it would. We agree.
Hey guys, did you guys have any issues with converting packages to the new DX structure? And issues I mean by losing history, Git history, or what people have pushed those code changes up?
So for certain kinds of conversions, you're going to lose Git history. If you convert an object into a whole divided up thing, you're going to lose your history on that object. That is an acceptable loss because it's going to make your future better. But for things like classes and so forth, you should be able to track those as a rename in Git. And you might have to do a little bit of fooling around in Git, but for example, if you've got a source folder and then you convert the whole thing over into your app folder, if you delete the source folder, then Git starts looking around, hey, where did that class go? And then it finds it and identifies it as a rename, and then it'll keep your history for the class.
That's amazing. Thank you.
So you guys had a existing life cycle of your development life cycle where you had continuous integration for an older model before moving to DX, and as you package smaller pieces out, and you said you do it incrementally, now you pull that one piece out. Do you have those two now running in parallel, the old method and then pieces of it going out in DX then?
Yes.
Okay.
So to kind of dovetail on that previous question, as we've slowly transitioned small things out, we're making a note of it saying, okay, we moved all this stuff, it's now in a DX package somewhere else. And that's one of the challenging parts, is you're going to have these two different ways of working with Salesforce now. Some people are really going to like working on certain projects, but it's just part of the conversion process. I didn't really see a super elegant way to avoid it.
Saurabh, in your slide about your development lifecycle, you had in the center, in the testing, internal testing stage, you had an artifact called a review app. What exactly is a review app? Is that a scratch org? And if so, how do you expose that to the other members of your team, like your QA engineers?
Yeah, so that's basically a scratch org only. So once your CI process kicks in, your automated testing, your security scanning, your quality scanning, all those things happen. Then you can spin up the latest code base with your latest change for your QA people. So your internal team members can, that's basically a scratch org. That is not being used for development. Scratch org, as a developer, when I develop my code, when I spin up a scratch org, that is for my own development. When I'm done, when I have committed the code, at that point of time, I spin up that scratch org directly from my CI tool itself, not from my local machine. So that scratch org is available for anyone in my team to access and see how my latest functionality that I developed is working, whether or not everything is fine or not. So it's available for everybody.
Thank you.
When you create the scratch org, you can create a one-click login URL with an SID, a session ID attached to it. And so we basically take that session ID, and then we use GitLab. It's got a feature called environments where you can actually make it accessible as a link in there. But basically, you take that session ID URL, and we have another CI process that'll refresh that if the link's expired.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Hi there. So I want to understand a little bit more about the strategy to start in starting small. And let's say we have, let's say there are multiple teams developing apps in Salesforce. If one of the teams wanted to essentially just start with Salesforce DX, and the other teams, they are actually using like chain sets or Anscripts, how did you guys deal with like conflict management? Like, let's say that one team is actually Salesforce DX and using some artifacts, and then the other team is also using the same thing. Like, how did you guys, think through those?
So the way that I approach it is that you can still have the old system of change sets and sandboxes. So the way I like to approach it is that if you have a team working in DX and you want to eventually push those assets over to a team that's not working in DX, you just push it to a sandbox, and then those assets just become the same on that sandbox as if the developer had worked directly on the sandbox.
And I think there's also some, it blocks you. For example, if you actually publish a package and a bit of metadata is associated with that package, then I think you can't deploy that in the traditional way. You're blocked from deploying that metadata in the traditional way that particular field, for example, because it's associated with the package, it can only be deployed through that package.
Yeah, the guidance that we've been giving around this is mainly that if you're starting to look to package something up, this is a decision that you're making, that the set of code or configuration that you're organizing into the package is something that you're going to develop and iterate together on over time. So when you have that module or that package installed into your production org, if someone wants to update something, ideally, they go back through the development process of that package. So if you have other groups that want to work on that same code, and they currently are through a change set process, then the thing to do there, and we're going to highlight some of this actually in some of the presentations and content we have later this in Trello DX, but it's to set up a hybrid model. So you get someone from your team that understands DevOps to help spin up a Scratch org and let someone then take advantage of, say, the setup interfaces that are in that Scratch org to do their development. And then you can have that same ops person then, when they're done, pull everything down and then push it through the process. We had some, I'll just bring this up now because I'm sure some people think about this. I'm sure a lot of you think about this. There's been a lot of feedback that I've had over the past 3 days about, well, what do we do when people are making changes in production? Right now, we do not have a specific feature designed around handling that. We have some ideas for what we would do for packaging to sort of test against potential modifications of things before you install a new package version. There's also some potential around our source tracking that we currently do in Scratch orgs, and to start pushing that as a different feature set for just general metadata change tracking in lots of different org types. So if you're worried about production org changes, I would say you should be worried about that, but you should, so if you have sets of metadata that are going through a package development process or a change set development process, and those same things are modified in production, you're going to have to try to find ways of tracking what people are doing so you can somehow get that back into your dev process.
Thank you. So Salesforce DX greenfield projects are very easy. We all agree on that. But going from happy soup to package is very complex. Can you speak to the complexities that you've come across and how you solve them?
Before someone answers, I'm just going to plug this before I think he walks out of the room. There's a conversation tomorrow around unlocked packages, and John Daniel, if you raise your hand real quick, he's going to be presenting on a lot of stuff that he's done to break up the org. So I just wanted to plug that very quickly before they start kicking us out of here. But yes, now please also answer.
It depends. It depends. I mean, the worst case is that on certain projects we've had to look at, for instance, unsupported metadata types. We've had to rethink a project and say, does it really need this unsupported metadata type, and pull it out. Fortunately, that doesn't, I haven't experienced that a lot. It's been on one or two things, and it's usually been the projects that we've been waiting to convert. So there's a reason why we've only converted 60% time aside. But yeah, it's not a super straightforward process. It's nice to see that you know, a lot of people are kind of experiencing the same thing, and now we're starting it. Because, I mean, the key thing about this, and having worked on it since the pilot, is that it's super uncharted territory. And there's not been, it's all just been, you know, churning, trying to figure out what's going to work and what isn't. And as we've sort of gotten into a rhythm, now we kind of have some direction. But now I've gotten a lot of really good ideas from these two companies and from some of the stuff that other people are doing. So I'd say, you know, just stay in the loop.
Thank you.
Yeah, to add a little bit more there, so like I was saying in the very beginning, we're going to start to work on generating more content to help people understand how to break this apart. There's an art to it, which is how do I logically think about my org, and then there's the science to it, which is, well, what actual physical metadata can I break up, and how should I strategize about breaking that up? Some common things to throw out right now would be, if you're highly profile-based, you're going to start wanting to think as you plan your packages to switch to a permission set based model, because those are more easy to remove and add inside of a package or module boundary. Fields, for instance, on an object, those have their own API name, can be referenced directly. They don't have to be referenced around an object, so those things can be separated and passed around on package boundaries. So those are some examples of things. Any other questions? Oh, we have to, well, we'll be around to answer more questions. Thanks, everyone.